I don't think she needs to be in this meeting, Connor said without looking at me. It's a strategy session, not a legacy debrief. That was the moment. Not the worst thing he'd said, not by a mile, but the exact moment I knew I was being quietly erased like a smudge on glass. My husband, William, the man who once called me the backbone of the company in his conference speeches, blinked like he hadn't heard it, adjusted his reading glasses, nodded, didn't say a word. I capped my pen, closed my notepad, leather-bound, full of annotations for vendor risk assessments and loan compliance timelines, and walked out of the glass-walled boardroom without a sound. Just the soft pad of my heels across the carpet and the subtle click of the door. People love a messy exit. They expect yelling, a thrown stapler, tears, something they can quote at lunch. But I've found the silence lasts longer. And hey, while I've still got your attention, if you like stories where karma doesn't knock, it invoices, you might want to subscribe and hit that like button. It really helps our team keep bringing you stories where the quiet ones bite last. Anyway, it had started gradually. William and I built the business out of a half-renovated garage. I ran vendor relationships, wrote our first checks, wrangled early tax filings, and designed our entire invoicing system from a spreadsheet and 3 hours of YouTube tutorials. He was the face, I was the infrastructure. And that balance worked for a while, until the face got older and the infrastructure didn't wear designer shoes. When Connor returned from his MBA program, some expensive East Coast institute with a Latin motto and a quarterly newsletter for alumni who still call their mother's mother, came with a click-click PowerPoint and a whiteboard full of buzzwords. Disruption, digitization, lean transformation. He used verticalize as a verb, said I was too anecdotal in my data reviews. The first thing he did was change our org chart. My role shifted from executive financial coordinator to advisor to the CEO. Then he shortened it to just advisor. Then my name disappeared altogether. I should have pushed back. But William said, let him try. You know how these kids are, he's just eager. Eager, like a crow picking at bones. The second thing Connor did was freeze me out of all budgetary reviews. Finance is moving to a real-time dashboard, he said with a smirk, not post-it notes and spreadsheets. Except that dashboard still pulls from the system I built. And those post-it notes? They were budget breakdowns the field guys trusted because I actually went out there. Hard hat, steel-toe boots and all, and listened. Vendors still emailed me when they didn't get paid on time. One even drove all the way in from Lima to hand me an invoice in person. Said, no offense, ma'am, but I don't trust that boy with a roll of quarters. And the bank, oh, the bank. I still had lunch every quarter with Marvin, our original lending officer. We'd sit at the Courtyard Cafe, he ordered the same Cobb salad every time, and he'd ask how things were running. Not the balance sheet, running. Like an engine, was it warm, loud, smoking? He knew I'd tell the truth. That last lunch, Marvin leaned forward and said, you're still listed as the guarantor on the security covenant, right? I nodded. He exhaled like that meant something to him. Something solid, something dependable. Connor never once asked why we got such favorable loan terms. He thought it was his father's legacy reputation. Not my 20-year spotless credit history. Not my carefully nurtured relationships. Not my name, on the covenant as guarantor to secure that final $3.2 million extension. Instead, he laughed about how the old ways are dragging us down and made the staff attend mandatory innovation mindset workshops led by a guy who wore loafers without socks. The building changed. So did the air. Connor started talking about IPOs and valuation multiples. William checked out entirely, showed up to the office twice a week, mostly to golf with his cronies or forward articles about AI logistics with subject lines like interesting. I became a ghost, a relic, smiled at politely in hallways, left off the group lunch invites. One day the office manager cheerfully informed me that my parking spot had been reassigned to Connor's dog walker. I kept my head down, kept showing up, kept reconciling expense accounts and correcting vendor overpayments no one else noticed. Until that moment in the meeting. The most valuable contribution you can make is to walk through that door. Connor didn't smirk, he didn't flinch. He said it like he was complimenting me, like it was a damn favor. And William, he just looked at the table, so I walked. But I didn't go home. I went to my office, yes, it still had my name on the door, at least for the day, and opened the fireproof cabinet where I kept our original loan documents. Flipped through until I reached the page I remembered. Clause 14b. My finger stopped on the sentence I'd underlined years ago with a red pen. In the event of removal, resignation, or termination of the named corporate guarantor, lender reserves the right to initiate full call or reassignment of debt within 72 hours. I read it twice. Once as Catherine the wife, once as Catherine the guarantor. Then I closed the folder, locked the cabinet, and exhaled slowly. They thought I was gone, but I hadn't even started. The strategy meeting wasn't called so much as declared. Connor had sent a calendar invite titled Q4 Vision Alignment and Change Strategy. Bold font, no agenda. Just the assumption that we'd all show up grateful to bask in his glorious MBA enlightenment. I came early, old habit. I like to sit near the projector in case the tech went sideways, which it often did. Connor showed up 20 minutes late wearing a quarter zip and smugness like cologne. He brought 2 consultants I'd never seen before, young, identical beards, matching MacBooks, and that hollow-eyed enthusiasm of men who drink protein shakes for dinner and call it bio-optimizing. William walked in right behind them, looking like he'd been dragged from bed. Hair still damp, collar wrinkled. He gave me a sheepish nod and sat across the table without a word. Connor clicked the remote. The screen flashed with buzzwords so generic I thought it was satire. Agility, disruption, culture shift. One slide said legacy not equal to loyalty. He launched into his sermon about the changing business landscape like he was pitching a startup to venture capitalists. The words came fast, memorized, and practiced. All delivery, zero soul. And while we honor the contributions of our foundational members, he said, eyes darting in my direction, we must recognize when systems and personnel are no longer aligned with scalable growth. The bearded twins nodded like dashboard bobbleheads. I stared at the notepad in front of me. Blank, no numbers to check, no figures to balance. I wasn't there to work, I was there to be paraded out. I think it's time, Connor continued. Redefine roles that were formed in a different era. Emotional capital is not the same as operational relevance. I blinked. Emotional capital? He made me sound like an antique rocking chair passed down out of pity. Then he looked at me. Direct, rehearsed, Catherine. The most valuable contribution you can make now is to walk through that door and let us build forward. I waited for William to speak, to blink, to laugh, to clear his throat and say, all right, son, let's not be dramatic. But he didn't. He looked at the legal pad in front of him like it might swallow him whole, scribbled something illegible, avoided my eyes. I felt my breath slow, not quicken. Like my body already knew this was coming and had made peace with it before I had. I smoothed the front of my blouse, sky blue cotton silk blend, a gift from William last Christmas when he still remembered what I liked, and pushed back my chair. No speeches, no rebuttals, just the sound of the legs sliding against the floor and the breathless vacuum that followed. I walked out of the conference room, but not out of the building. I went straight to my office, locked the door, and sat down at the cabinet in the far corner. It was an old beast, metal, dented, full of thick manila folders and actual carbon copies. I flipped to the drawer marked Loan Docs 2017, pulled the file, sat at my desk and opened it. Clause 14B was right where I remembered, halfway down page 9. I read it twice, once with my stomach in knots, the second time with a pencil in my hand. In the event of removal, resignation, or termination of the named corporate guarantor, I'd signed it personally. Marvin, our lender, had insisted, said the bank would approve the extension if I guaranteed the covenant. Said my name meant stability, and stability meant low risk. I remembered the afternoon I signed it. Marvin had bought me lunch, called me the real asset behind this operation. Said the bank liked William, but they trusted me. I underlined the clause. Lender reserves the right to initiate full call or reassignment of debt within 72 hours, 3 days. That's what they had if the bank decided my termination was material. I leaned back in my chair and stared at the ceiling. The HVAC hummed faintly above me, a system I'd fought to upgrade when Connor said it was a low-priority capex. I could hear the muffled chatter from the boardroom, laughter even. The new regime celebrating its first act of control. They thought I was gone, thought I'd vanish like a dry erase memo. But what they fired wasn't just a woman in a blouse. They fired the corporate guarantor, the keystone of their loan agreement. The quiet, unassuming clause keeping the roof from caving in. And now, countdown had started. I called the bank the next morning. Not Marvin, he'd retired 6 months ago to Florida, took up painting lighthouses or some noble nonsense. I got his replacement, Lexi, young, polite, voice like a guided meditation. Corporate lending, this is Lexi. Hi Lexi, this is Catherine Langford. I'm calling to confirm a change in my status as named guarantor on our 2017 covenant, account ending in 3047. I've been terminated as of yesterday morning. There was a pause, not long but not short either. I could hear her clicking through the file. Okay, one moment. Yes, I do see your name listed as guarantor. You're saying your employment status has changed? I'm no longer with the company, I said, flat, clean. Another pause, longer this time, the kind that goes brittle around the edges. I see, thank you for letting us know. I'll flag this and notify the compliance team. Can I confirm a good number to reach you in case we need further documentation? I gave her my cell. She read it back twice. Then, is there anything else I can help you with today, Mrs. Langford? No, I said, that'll do. Okay, well, thank you for the update. She hung up like someone easing the lid back onto a box full of snakes. That was it. No sirens, no emails, no urgent follow-up. Just the kind of corporate silence that makes people sweat in expensive chairs. I knew what would happen next, or rather what could happen next. Banks don't like uncertainty. They like documents and certainties and 6-digit numbers that behave. The clause I triggered was small, buried, and conditional, but real. And I had the original copy. Not a PDF, not a version control nightmare. The signed, ink on paper original with the notary stamp slightly smudged. I didn't call William. I didn't go back to the office. Instead, I did what I've always done when people underestimated me. I went for a walk, poured a black coffee in a travel mug, zipped my coat, and circled the industrial park twice until my feet stopped marching and my mind started moving. Connor, meanwhile, was already playing Empire Builder. That morning, the company's LinkedIn page announced the next phase of corporate evolution. A 5-paragraph post with Connor's face at the top, smiling like he'd invented oxygen. Proud to lead this incredible team into the next chapter. Change is never easy, but true leaders embrace transformation. Exciting innovations ahead. The comments made me ill. So well-deserved. Finally, fresh blood, fresh vision. They didn't know that Connor once asked me how to reorder checks. That 3 years ago. He locked himself out of our payroll system for 2 weeks and told HR it was user error, meaning them, not him. They didn't know that he couldn't explain net 30 terms if you handed him a diagram and a puppet show. William, for his part, reposted the announcement with 3 clapping hand emojis. I closed my laptop. I could have screamed, cried, thrown something breakable, but instead I made soup. Lentils and carrots. Kind that takes all day to simmer but tastes like certainty. I was no longer reacting. I was repositioning. There's a difference. I pulled a legal pad from the drawer, labeled the top. Action items, confirm status with Lexi White heavy checkmark, review Covenant White heavy checkmark, reach out to acquisition contact, draft summary of contingency options pending, locate HR removal paperwork public record. Pending, halfway down the page I stopped, stared at the line, reach out to acquisition contact. That name had been circling the drain in my head since last week's Chamber of Commerce mixer. I had options, more than they thought, more than I let on. By the time the sun dipped past the pine trees behind our yard, I'd updated my resume, prepared 3 folders of documentation, and reread the covenant again. Just to feel it. Just to remind myself that this wasn't a tantrum, it was leverage. Legal, quiet, written leverage. At exactly 6:47 p.m., my phone buzzed with a notification. Connor had posted a second update. Leadership isn't about titles, it's about choices. Sometimes the hardest decisions are the most necessary. I'm proud of our new path. Attached was a photo of him standing in front of our headquarters, arms folded like he was posing for a box of cereal no one asked for. He thought this was the hard part. He hadn't even begun to imagine how quiet revenge can be, how it doesn't show up in your inbox or knock on your door. It just waits, and then it opens the vault. I met Marvin at a diner just off Route 35, the kind of place where the coffee is burnt and the biscuits taste like regret, but they know how to keep a booth private. He was already there when I walked in, sipping something dark and bitter out of a chipped mug that probably hadn't been washed since Bush was in office. Not that he minded. Marvin was the kind of man who looked like he'd been born old, sloped shoulders, slow blink, tie permanently wrinkled from 40 years of loan approvals and boardroom lies. He stood when he saw me, still a gentleman even in retirement. "Catherine," he said like it was a full sentence. Marvin, we didn't hug, just nodded. 2 people who'd done battle with balance sheets and IRS deadlines and somehow lived to laugh about it. He gestured to the booth. I took the seat that doesn't face the kitchen. I know how you are with distractions. I smiled, slid into the opposite side, and set the folder between us. Thought we were meeting for eggs, he said. We are, I replied, but I need to show you something first. He raised one eyebrow, same way he used to when William pitched expansion plans with no cash flow to back them up. I opened the folder, flipped to the 9th page, and rotated it toward him. Clause 14, subsection B. He adjusted his reading glasses and scanned the line, mouthing the words like an old preacher going over a familiar psalm. In the event of removal, resignation, or termination of the named corporate guarantor, his finger followed the sentence. Lender reserves the right to initiate full call or reassignment of debt within 72 hours. He leaned back. The booth creaked like it might give out beneath him. You're telling me this clause got triggered? He asked, voice low, steady. I folded my hands and looked him dead in the eye. Yesterday morning, Jesus, he muttered. What the hell happened? I shrugged. Connor happened. Vision boards and legacy cleansing. You know the type. Marvin exhaled, long and slow. You always were the reason we approved that extension. I told my risk guys, I don't care how many trophies Williams got on his shelf. Catherine's the one who knows where every penny goes. You had credibility. I nodded. Still do. And now apparently leverage. He picked up the paper again. They really let you go. Connor told me my most valuable contribution would be to walk out the door, so I did. He laughed, dry and sharp, and William sat there like his backbone had gone on vacation. Marvin whistled through his teeth. That clause wasn't just for show. You signed as guarantor, not just co-founder. That triggers a compliance event even if the firm doesn't realize it yet. Oh, I said, smiling thinly, they don't. He looked up from the document, a strange glint in his eye, not quite admiration, more like confirmation. You here to nuke them, Catherine? No, not yet. Marvin raised his eyebrows. I'm here to understand my options, and yours. He leaned forward, elbows on the table, suddenly more engaged than I'd seen him in years. We're talking full reassignment? I know you're not their officer anymore, Marvin, but you still have contacts, relationships, influence. If this goes to compliance escalation, it will, he interrupted. Then I'd like a say in where the pieces fall. He tapped the page with one finger. And if they scramble to fix it, find out HR processed me as a full termination. Filed it in payroll, submitted to insurance, it's official, they just don't know the cost yet. Marvin shook his head slowly. You always played long ball. I took a sip of coffee. It was awful, exactly as expected. I just don't like being underestimated, I said. World's full of men who think silence means surrender, he replied, but you've always been surgical. I passed him a second folder. Slimmer, neater. That's a proposal. If the reassignment moves forward, I've identified a buyer who's ready to assume debt and key assets. Clean transition, no job losses, leadership continuity. Marvin flipped through it, grunted, "You?" I didn't answer. He set it down and gave me a long, appraising look. They won't see this coming. They didn't see me while I was there. He gave a low chuckle, slid the folders back. "You sure you don't want eggs?" "I'm sure," I said, "but I'll take one of those sad biscuits." He waved the waitress over with 2 fingers. As she poured him a refill, Marvin looked back at me. "You know, when I drafted that clause back in 17, I thought maybe it'd just be belt and suspenders legalese." "It was," I said, "until they cut the belt." He laughed again, but softer this time. "Damn fools." Outside, the parking lot was half frozen. A winter sun tried to shine, but never quite broke through the cloud cover. As we left the diner, Marvin held the door for me and said, "You don't need to nuke them, Catherine." "I know. You just need to let gravity do the work." The press conference was held in the company atrium, just below the glass catwalk I helped design back when the firm had exactly 6 employees and a $17,000 budget. Now it was draped in branded banners, full of staged enthusiasm and color-coordinated interns pretending to look busy. Connor stood at the podium like a boy playing CEO in his dad's suit, flanked by consultants who looked like they'd been Xeroxed out of a pitch deck. "We are entering a bold, data-driven era," he announced, hands clasped like he was receiving communion. "And while we appreciate the contributions of those who came before, we refuse to be shackled by legacy systems, legacy habits, or legacy mindsets." Polite laughter. "Starting today," he continued, "we're overhauling our financial operations. Full automation, real-time insights, no more hand-holding, no more anecdotal analysis, just performance." My phone vibrated on the counter beside me. A former team lead texted, "Did he just call your entire department anecdotal?" I replied, "Yes, bless his heart." Connor went on to unveil a shiny new web portal with a flashy dashboard and widgets that looked great in screenshots, but had all the structural integrity of a toddler's block tower. I recognized the interface. It was a third-party platform we test-piloted 2 years ago and dropped when it failed every compliance audit. But now it was back, branded as Vision. William stood beside him, nodding along with a tight-lipped smile, clapping at the right beats. If you didn't know him, you'd think he was proud. I knew better. That look wasn't pride, it was survival. Connor had taken the wheel, and William was riding shotgun with a seatbelt full of denial. What neither of them knew, what no one in that entire staged theater of a press event knew, was that HR had botched the paperwork. Badly. Someone in payroll had misfiled the notice of separation. Instead of listing me as resigned or voluntarily stepped down, it marked the checkbox for involuntary termination. Full stop. Flagged for benefit cessation, COBRA transition, and internal audit review. I knew because I requested a copy through an old contact in operations. It arrived in my inbox at 3:12 a.m., sandwiched between a Walgreens coupon and a spam email about senior dating near you. I didn't forward it to the bank. Not yet. I was waiting. Instead, I focused on my 2 folders. The first was already half complete, documents for the bank. The covenant clause, my signed termination notice, internal HR documentation, a copy of my guarantor agreement, and the original loan schedule showing my name in ink. I tabbed the page with the clause in red, highlighted for the compliance officer who'd be reviewing it once it landed on their desk. The second folder was more delicate, a proposal draft, confidential, for private acquisition group headquartered just 3 cities away. We'd crossed paths at a Chamber of Commerce roundtable months back. At the time, they'd expressed mild interest in forming a partnership. I'd politely declined. Now I was politely circling back. The proposal included a clean handover of client lists, active project forecasts, vendor contacts, and critically, a plan for asset assumption tied directly to the outstanding debt. It wouldn't just be buying equipment or goodwill. They'd be absorbing the very thing Connor didn't understand, trust. The trust of the bank, the vendors, the team, all the things you can't put in a spreadsheet or wrap in a KPI. And I would run it, not out of vengeance, out of muscle memory. That night, while the company's official Instagram page posted a filtered shot of Connor shaking hands with a software partner, exciting collabing coming, I was on a Zoom call with the acquisition group's head of corporate strategy, walking him through the fine print of our existing lender agreement. "Do you foresee any resistance from the existing leadership?" he asked, sipping tea from a University of Michigan mug. "No," I said. "They won't even understand what's happening until after it's over." He raised an eyebrow. "And you're confident the bank will trigger the clause?" "They don't need to," I said. "They just need to read it." He nodded slowly. "All right then. Send the final documents when you're ready." I clicked off the call and sat back. In another tab, Connor's smiling face beamed beneath a headline, "Langford Industries enters its next chapter." They always love using words like chapter and journey. Like business is a children's book and not a live grenade. I opened the acquisition folder one more time, triple-checked the dates, cross-verified the debt ratio, labeled the file transition draft K Langford PDF, and saved it to a clean, private drive. Then I opened my calendar. The bank's reassessment window would hit in 48 hours. I didn't need to chase them. I just needed to be ready when they called. The call came in at 7:42 a.m., just as Connor was finishing his pre-office ritual of iced coffee, podcast buzzwords, and mirror pep talks. The receptionist buzzed his line twice, and when he finally picked up, her voice was tight. Connor, it's a formal request from Langford's lender. They've asked for an emergency meeting, in person, this morning. He rolled his eyes so hard it probably gave him whiplash. Tell M we're busy. They can email if it's important. They said it is important, she replied. They used the phrase breach of covenant. That gave him half a pause, just long enough to furrow his brow before brushing it off. It's probably compliance nonsense, he said, not knowing that phrase would age like unrefrigerated shrimp. Just scare tactics. They do this when they want to push an audit. 10 minutes later, the CEO's office phone rang. William answered groggily. He was still recovering from one of his late working dinners, which, based on his Uber history, had ended at a steakhouse bar with 2 Manhattans and a migraine. Yes, this is William Langford. This is Peter Shelton from Bank Security Compliance. We're calling regarding a possible material disclosure failure related to your current operating agreement. We'd like to meet with you and your executive team today. In person, boardroom, William sat up. Material failure? Yes, sir. And possibly a breach of covenant under Clause 14B. We'll be arriving at 10:30. He didn't ask which clause. He didn't even pretend to remember the numbers. He just said, we'll be ready, and hung up like the air had just been sucked from the room. He called Connor immediately. They said, what? Connor laughed, chewing on a protein bar. Come on, Dad. You really think this is anything more than procedural ass covering? I don't know, William said, rubbing his temples. They mentioned covenant terms, disclosure, something about Clause 14. Connor waved it off. We'll show up, we'll smile, we'll nod, and we'll tell them everything's fine. No one's breached anything. We're golden. He didn't mention my name once. At 10:15 a.m., the company boardroom was a fishbowl of anxiety. Legal was there. The CFO was there. A junior HR rep hovered nervously by the espresso machine, clutching a file she'd printed an hour ago and hadn't dared to read. William paced. Connor rehearsed opening lines in his head, lines like we're committed to transparency, and we believe in proactive engagement. Doors opened at 10:32. 3 people walked in, a senior bank compliance officer in a navy suit, a middle-aged lawyer with a soft briefcase, and someone who looked suspiciously like an analyst fresh out of Wharton. They didn't sit right away. They placed a single thick folder on the table, face down. Connor stood to greet them. Gentlemen, thanks for coming in. We're excited to. Where is Catherine Langford? The compliance officer interrupted. Connor blinked. She's no longer with the company. She stepped down last week. The compliance officer tilted his head like a confused terrier. She stepped down? Yes, Connor said, voluntarily. The officer flipped open the folder, revealing a stamped copy of my HR separation notice, the one with the little black check mark next to involuntary termination. William looked down at it and paled. His hand hovered over his coffee cup like he'd forgotten what it was for. I believe. The lawyer calmly, this is classified under your own internal documentation as an executive-level involuntary termination. Would you agree? Connor opened his mouth, closed it, then said, look, it wasn't meant that way. It was symbolic. She was no longer a necessary. She was the named corporate guarantor, the compliance officer said, voice now low and pointed. Clause 14B of your lending agreement gives us the right to initiate a full reassessment, potentially a full call within 72 hours of that termination. You could hear the air conditioning hum. You could hear someone's stomach growl. You could not hear anyone breathing. The junior HR rep looked like she wanted to melt into the carpet. Connor's smile faltered. Wait, you're serious? We're not in breach. I mean, she didn't do anything. She just left. William turned to him slowly, voice hoarse. You fired her. Technically, you processed it as a termination. Lawyer said, you notified your insurer. You filed COBRA paperwork. You notified payroll. You did everything that constitutes material severance of a principal party. Connor looked at his father, suddenly less like a CEO and more like a kid who dropped his dad's drill in the lake. I didn't think it would matter. The compliance officer raised an eyebrow. You didn't think it would matter who your guarantor was on a 7-figure line of credit? Connor glanced around the table, searching for allies. Legal was frozen. The CFO was white as a file cabinet. Then the final shoe dropped. The door opened behind them. I was already seated, at the far end of the boardroom where the light fell perfectly across the table. I'd gotten in early, used my old access code before they thought to revoke it. The compliance officer smiled when he saw me. Ah, Mrs. Langford, thank you for joining us. We've reviewed the original documents you submitted. They were illuminating. Connor stared at me like I was a ghost. William just whispered, Catherine, I gave them both a nod. Don't worry, I said, I'm just here to observe, and maybe, just maybe, watch the whole damn ceiling start to crack. The documents made a sound when they hit the table, a heavy final sort of thud, not loud, but with the weight of inevitability. The kind of sound that says, you don't walk this back. The banker, Peter Shelton, lead officer of commercial risk management, smoothed the top page with one palm. His legal counsel, a thin man in a charcoal suit with eyes like wet granite, stood behind him, silent but visibly bristling. They didn't sit right away. They wanted everyone to squirm, and it worked. I sat at the end of the table, hands folded neatly, expression neutral. The same way I'd sat through 3 decades of board meetings, budget wars, and Connor's painfully overwrought strategy presentations. Only now I wasn't part of the company. I was just the match with a memory. Shelton cleared his throat. I'm going to read directly from the lending agreement executed between Langford Industries and Union Capital, dated March 9, 2017. Article Roman 4, Covenant Obligations. Clause 14, subsection B. He looked around to make sure everyone was paying attention. They were. In the event of removal, resignation, or termination of the named corporate guarantor, lender reserves the right to initiate full call or reassignment of debt within 72 hours of such action being made official in company documentation, payroll, or legal record. You could hear the hum of the fluorescent lights, the stretch of leather as someone shifted in their chair. He continued. In the above event, all outstanding loan privileges, discounts, and revolving credit limits shall be suspended pending review. Connor's mouth opened, closed, and opened again. It wasn't really. Shelton turned to him with a look that could strip paint. Let me ask plainly, who authorized the termination of Catherine Langford? Connor glanced at William. William's eyes were fixed on the document like it had grown fangs. I did, Connor said, but it was more of a symbolic shift, a gesture. She wasn't actively contributing to the day-to-day, and we were just trying to modernize the org chart. Clean up roles. Symbolic? Shelton asked, raising a brow. So the COBRA notice you sent to your insurer was symbolic. The HR code marked involuntary termination? The payroll shutdown? The access revocation? Connor swallowed. Loudly. I mean yes, but we didn't mean you filed it, the lawyer said, finally speaking. His voice was clipped and cold, meaning you enacted it. Intent is irrelevant. The documents are official. The records are time-stamped. The clause is triggered. He opened his briefcase and slid 3 stamped copies of the termination notice across the table. Effective 9:41 a.m. on Tuesday, Catherine Langford was no longer legally affiliated with this company. William reached for one of the pages, but his hand was shaking so badly that it took him 2 tries to get a grip. He looked up at me. Eyes red? Why didn't you tell me? I did, I said quietly. Years ago, when we signed the covenant, you just weren't listening. Connor turned toward me now, his voice rising in panic. You set us up. No, I said, calm as a sunrise. You set yourself up. I just didn't stop you. Shelton leaned forward. We are formally notifying Langford Industries that your current credit facilities are suspended pending compliance review. Unless an alternate guarantor can be approved and the covenant renegotiated within 48 hours, all obligations will be due in full. Connor stood up so fast his chair tipped and hit the wall. This is ridiculous. We're in the middle of a restructure. We're innovating. We've got contracts lined up. We're not some fly-by-night operation. You're a company in breach, the lawyer replied flatly. You can call it innovation. We call it exposure. The CFO spoke for the first time. Is there any path forward? Shelton turned toward me. That depends. Mrs. Langford, do you have any intention of reinstating your guarantor status? I smiled politely. No, I've made other arrangements. Connor looked like he was about to cry. William stared at the table like it might collapse under him. Shelton nodded. Then we proceed as outlined. He stood. You'll receive formal notice within the hour. I suggest you start preparing your board for the implications. This isn't a small oversight. It's a violation with consequences. And just like that, they began to pack up. Connor turned toward me frantic. You're blowing up everything. You built this too. You're going to destroy what you helped make. I didn't destroy anything, I said, standing slowly. I simply stopped holding it together. I picked up my folder and walked toward the door. Behind me, I heard William mutter something under his breath, and the only word I caught was my name. Peter Shelton didn't raise his voice. That was the thing. No theatrics, no pounding the table. Just calm, institutional bloodletting, like a doctor explaining how much time is left on a terminal clock. You have 48 hours, he said, glancing once more at the covenant, to either repay the full balance, $3.2 million principal, plus interest and fees, or transfer the debt to a qualifying guarantor approved by Union Capital's compliance office. Connor looked like he'd swallowed battery acid. That's insane. 48 hours? Shelton didn't even blink, per the terms you signed. William opened his mouth, then closed it again. Whatever was left of his composure had collapsed somewhere around the word breach. Can't we renegotiate? The CFO asked, voice barely above a whisper. You can submit a formal request, Shelton replied. It won't stop the clock. Legal counsel stood beside him, flipping through a pre-printed packet that looked freshly drafted. Pages upon pages of implications, deadlines, collateral evaluations. The boardroom, once Connor's stage, had become a surgical theater, and everyone knew who was holding the scalpel. That's when I opened my folder. One quiet motion. No dramatic flourish, no gotcha smile, just the simple, undeniable rustle of clean paper. I'd like to offer an alternative, I said. Every head turned. I stepped forward, laid out the documents, and slid them down the table like puzzle pieces they'd never bothered to look for. This is an asset assumption agreement from a third-party entity, KL Holdings. They've reviewed your current books, evaluated your loan status, and are prepared to assume all active debt obligations from Union Capital, effective immediately. The CFO blinked. You brought a buyer? No, I said. I am the buyer. Connor scoffed, but it was hollow. You're bluffing. You're not even on the board anymore. I don't need to be, I replied, still calm. I'm the named acquirer on this proposal. The offer is real. Terms are pre-approved pending lender confirmation. They're willing to take on the debt and assume operations of the company's key assets. Shelton picked up the packet, scanned, nodded once. Looks clean. Smart, actually. Connor rounded on me. This is a setup. You planned this. I prepared for this, I corrected. There's a difference. I turned to the board. I'm not here for revenge. This isn't spite, it's insurance. When I walked out that door, I took nothing with me but the one thing none of you paid attention to, liability. Now I'm offering you a way out. Debt covered, assets preserved, jobs protected, no lawsuits, no default notices. Just transfer and walk. Silence, then murmurs. The board members looked at each other. Two of them leaned in to whisper behind hands. One was already flipping through the proposal I'd handed over. A third, the longest tenured, said quietly, we should call a vote. Connor's voice pitched. You're seriously considering this? She's hijacking the company? Shelton shook his head. No, she's proposing a legal assumption of financial obligation. It's not a hijacking, it's a rescue. The CFO was sweating now. What happens if we don't agree? Shelton turned back to his folder. The debt becomes callable. Union Capital will begin asset seizure procedures within 72 hours. That includes equipment, vendor contracts, and your IP filings. William finally looked up. Catherine, he said, broken and tired. This isn't you. I met his gaze without blinking. You're right, this isn't me. This is the woman you ignored while she quietly guaranteed your future. The one who signed the papers while you chased headlines. This is the version you stopped listening to. He didn't answer. Connor slumped into his chair like a puppet with a cut string. The room around him had moved on. One board member pulled out their phone. Another requested a sidebar. The unraveling had started. I didn't gloat. I didn't smirk. I didn't twist the knife, because this wasn't about pain. It was about precision. Shelton gathered his things. We'll await your decision by close of business tomorrow. If we don't hear from you, the offer from Mrs. Langford will move forward. He nodded at me once, respect, not approval, and walked out. I collected my folder, slid the remaining documents back inside, and stood. As I reached the door, I paused. You all saw me as the soft one, I said, the silent one. But I was the signature at the bottom of the page. And that signature always had terms. Then I left. No applause needed. Connor tried one last time to reclaim the room. This isn't final, he said, voice cracking under the weight of everything he didn't understand. We can challenge this. We can renegotiate with the bank. There are clauses, other clauses, but no one was listening. Not the CFO, who was already on the phone with his personal attorney. Not the board chair, who stared at the wall like it had personally betrayed him. Not even William, who sat slumped at the head of the table, jaw slack, eyes unfocused, hands curled around nothing. The room didn't even feel like theirs anymore. It felt like a crime scene. Evidence of something butchered, not with violence, but with negligence. The silence was thick, not awkward, not waiting. Finished. Connor's voice dropped again. She was just, he gestured wildly. She was just my mom. The junior board member looked up, almost confused. She was the guarantor, 4 words, simple, final, the tombstone on his entire reign. The door opened quietly, and Peter Shelton stepped back in. He didn't sit, just walked over to me with a manila envelope in hand. We've received full documentation, he said. Your offer has been reviewed and approved. Transition will begin at 10 a.m. tomorrow. He extended his hand. Mrs. Langford, this concludes our obligations to your former firm. We appreciate your clarity. I shook his hand, firm, dry, absolute. Connor stood again, red-faced, desperate to claw back some illusion of control. This isn't fair, she didn't even warn us. William finally looked up. His face wasn't angry, it wasn't even hurt, it was small. He turned toward me like the weight of a decade had suddenly slammed into his chest. Why didn't you tell me? I looked at him, not with anger, not even with pity. Just the kind of quiet disappointment that lingers longer than hate. I did, I said, you just weren't listening. I gathered my folder, lighter now, and stepped toward the glass doors. No one stopped me, no one even stood. Outside, the sun had broken through the clouds. Sharp autumn light poured across the sidewalk like an omen, or maybe just timing. As I walked past the front of the building, I paused. Directly across the street, a new office space gleamed. The windows freshly cleaned, the signage mounted just this morning. KL Holdings, simple, clean, mine. I watched a technician finish aligning the plaque. He stepped back, nodded, and peeled off the last strip of protective plastic. It glinted for a second in the breeze, then fluttered to the curb like shed skin. I didn't smile. I didn't need to, because I'd done the hardest thing a woman in silence ever does. I waited, and I used their ignorance like a crowbar. The most valuable contribution I made was staying quiet until it counted. You're the real MVPs of the office jungle. Thanks for watching. Smash that subscribe button, or the coffee pot might just forget your next brew.